everybody, welcome back to my channel. Welcome to another episode of Come and Hear, where we talk about the Bible and take things from the Bible and talk about how to apply them to our modern lives. So in today's episode, we are going to be talking about Gideon. Specifically, we're going to be talking about callings and ministry as we learn from Gideon's story. So first of all, I'm going to be reading from Judges chapter 6, where we're introduced to Gideon, and we're going to be starting at verse 11. And it says, "Now the angel of the Lord came and sat under the terebinth tree, which was in Ophrah, which belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, while his son Gideon threshed wheat in the winepress, in order to hide it from the Midianites. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, 'The Lord is with you, you mighty man of valor.' Gideon said to him, 'O my Lord, if the Lord is with us, why then has all this happened to us? And where are all his miracles, which our fathers told us about, saying, Did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt? But now the Lord has forsaken us and delivered us into the hand of the Midianites.' Then the Lord turned to him and said, 'Go, in this might of yours, and you shall save Israel from the hand of the Midianites. Have I not sent you?' So he said to him, 'O my Lord, how can I save Israel? Indeed, my clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's house.' And the Lord said to him, 'Surely I will be with you, and you shall defeat the Midianites as one man.'" So a lot of times when we talk about the story of Gideon, we focus on the fleece and how he tested God and how God showed him, and then we move on towards his 300, how God kept sending his soldiers home until there was only 300, and then how God used this tiny army to defeat the Midianites, showing that it was really God who defeated them all along. And those are amazing parts of the story. I love the story of Gideon's 300, I do. But when I was reading this a couple months ago, it was actually this exchange that really jumped out at me, especially how Gideon assumes at first that God is talking in the plural when God is actually talking in singular. And by that, I mean that, as it said, when God first appeared to him, he said, "I am with you." And Gideon's like, "Well, if you're with us, then why has all this happened?" And then God is like, no, I'm with you because you are going to be the one that saves your people. And if you're unfamiliar with where this story is picking up, the people of Israel had been conquered by the Midianites and were serving them. The Midianites had pretty much taken any weapons they had, and they would come and they would raid and they would take their food when they grew it. And so that's why he's threshing wheat in the wine press, because he's trying to hide it from the Midianites taking it. And so Israel has been oppressed for a long time. And of course, if you know the Bible, then you know that a lot of times Israel's oppression came from the fact that they turned away from God. And so Gideon is, asking God, "Where have you been all this time? What about all these stories about how you brought us out of Egypt and everything?" First of all, Israel would not have been in that situation if they had not turned their backs on God, but that's a whole nother video. But God is like, now that his people are calling out to him, he's ready to deliver them, and he's ready to use Gideon to do it. And Gideon, once God says it's going to be you, Gideon starts backpedaling, right? In verse 17, he goes on to say, "Then he said to him, 'If now I have found favor in your sight, then show me a sign that it is you who talk with me. Do not depart from here, I pray, until I come to you and bring you out my offering and set it before you.' And he said, 'I will wait until you come back.'" So the story goes on from there, and basically Gideon goes back to his house, he prepares an offering, and he brings it out, and God's still there, and God, takes up his offering, and Gideon's like, "Okay, I guess you are God." And then we go into the whole questioning thing with the fleece, and how he questions him with the fleece 3 times. Gideon does a lot of questioning. And it's funny, because when God first appears to him earlier, he does not question that it's God. When he's talking about, when he still thinks God is talking about Israel as a whole, he doesn't question it's God. But when God says, oh, no, I'm talking about you individually, I'm going to use you to save Israel, then he starts questioning, well, like, how do I know you're really God? How do I know you're really calling me to do this? What if I put out this fleece? What if you stay here till I go get an offering and all this stuff? Like, he was fully ready to believe it until it was, like, about him individually. And that's really what I want to talk about today. Because we have, as a church, a corporate calling, and then we have, as Christians, a personal calling. And I think that, honestly, a little bit too often, we like to focus on the corporate calling, and we kind of don't like to focus very much on the personal calling. When we start getting a personal calling, we can kind of backpedal a little bit like Gideon did. So, first of all, let's talk about what our corporate calling is. I think our corporate calling is a verse that we all know, and we all, it's one of the most famous verses in the Bible, and it comes from Matthew 28, verse 19, where Jesus is talking to his disciples right before he goes to heaven, and he says, "Go, therefore, and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all the things I have commanded you. And lo, I am with you always, even unto the end of the age." So I think that any Christian of any denomination, of any area of the world, can agree that these two verses, Matthew 28, 19 and 20, are the church's calling. I think everybody can agree on that, right? Because it's pretty clear. But we don't always agree on how that looks, how we go out and make disciples of all nations. And I think that is where our personal callings become different, because while we are all called as a church and as individuals to make disciples, it looks different for everybody. And in 1 Corinthians 12, that idea is really laid out, I think, more clearly than anywhere else. In 1 Corinthians 12, Paul is talking to the church at Corinth about spiritual gifts and about diversity in the church, and this is where he gives us the allegory about the church being the body. And so at verse 12, we pick up, and he says, "For as the body is one and has many members, but all the members of that one body, being many, are..." Well, sometimes I trip myself up reading Paul's words because he can sorry, let me start over. "For as the body is one and has many members, but all the members of that one body, being many, are one body, so also is Christ. For by one Spirit we were all baptized into one body, whether Jews or Greeks, whether slaves or free, and have all been made to drink into one Spirit. For in fact, the body is not one member, but many. If the foot should say, because I am not a hand, I am not of the body, is it therefore not of the body? And if the ear should say, because I am not an eye, I am not of the body, is it therefore not of the body? If the whole body were an eye, where would be the hearing? If the whole body were hearing, where would be the smelling? But now God has set the members, each one of them, in the body just as he pleased. And if they were all one member, where would the body be? Now indeed, there are many members, yet one body." And we have this allegory, but then before this, earlier in chapter 12, he even gets more specific. In chapter 4, he literally says, "There are diversities of gifts, but the same Spirit. There are differences of ministry, but the same Lord. And there are diversities of activities, but it is the same God who works all in all. But the manifestation of the Spirit is given to each one for the profit of all. For one is given the word of wisdom through the Spirit, to another the word of knowledge through the same Spirit, to another faith by the same Spirit, to another gifts of healing by the same Spirit, to another working of miracles, to another prophecy, to another discerning of spirits, to another different kinds of tongues, to another the interpretation of tongues. But one and the same Spirit works in all these, distributing to each one individually as he hears." So we all have different gifts, and all of those gifts, and all of us with those gifts, we make up different parts of the body of Christ, and we're all important just as the hand is just as important as the eye in the body. But let's talk about corporate callings versus personal callings in the church in the modern day, because obviously this isn't the ancient church. This isn't the ancient world. We're not fighting physical wars like Gideon and his 300 were, but we are fighting spiritual wars. We're fighting spiritual wars every day, and we're doing our best to make disciples, and we have to know how we're called to do that. And as a corporate calling, you know, a lot of people think that the corporate calling for making disciples of all nations is just evangelistic series and missionaries. And yes, those all have their places and they're amazing, but there is so much more that there is to it. I know for my denomination, on a corporate level, we have so many outlets where we work. We do mission work. We have missionaries in our church. We also do healthcare as evangelism. Back in the 1800s, our church was starting sanitariums and health clinics, and today in the modern day, we started the largest healthcare system in the state of Florida, and we have hospitals all over the nation that were started by our church because healthcare is something we care about. As well as education, my denomination has all sorts of Christian education from elementary schools all the way up to universities. And we do the missionary works. I have friends who have been missionaries in other countries. And that's like on a global, national scale. On a church by church scale, we have, smaller ministries. Oh, we also do community service and disaster relief. Is something that my church does on a national scale, which is really great, and it's a really great way to reach people where they are and to meet their needs just like Christ did, which is one thing that that I appreciate about my church. And I'm not just doing this video to like brag on my church, although I think my church is awesome, but we crafted our mission foundations of education, healthcare, community service, and mission work on the way that Christ did it. Christ met people where they are. He healed them, he fed them, he made friends with them, and he helped them where they are, which is why we do disaster relief, which is why we have our healthcare and things like that. And then on a more church by church level, there are so many amazing church ministries. I know that my mom volunteers for a ministry called Bags of Love, and this is not just something that my denomination does. There are churches and groups all over the United States that participate this, and they make bags for children who are removed from their homes by CPS, because if you know anything about that, you know that those children are often taken with nothing, or maybe with just what they can carry in a trash bag. And so these bags of love, like social workers have them in the trunks of their car, or they'll have them at like the houses that they take them to give this child something, and they always have a quilt in it that's made by the volunteers. It has hygiene products, it has a stuffed animal, it has either toys or things related to their age group. So if they're like little kids, there's toys. If they're older kids, then it's like books or something that's more age appropriate. And this is something that a lot of different churches in our community are a part of. I know my mom works with our old church, and they make the bags, and they stuff the bags, and they give them to the CPS workers, as well as other private institutions that they work with. But another church in our area that is not a part of our denomination, I think there's like 3 other churches in our area, make the different quilts that go into the bags. So it's a whole community-based ministry of different denominations that all help do this. And I know that it's a nationwide kind of ministry, and it's really awesome. And then there are other ministries. The church that I went to when I was little, they had they call it a Dorcas ministry, which is based off of the character of Dorcas in the Bible who took care of our community, but it was really like a food bank that the church ran every Thursday for those in need. Our church that I go to right now, it has a single mothers ministry. There is a lovely lady in our church who meets with the single mothers in our church. I don't know how often they meet monthly or maybe weekly, I don't know, but they meet together and they encourage each other in single motherhood and in their Christian walk, and that's a great ministry for so again, some of these ministries are ministering to the community, some are ministering to Christians in the church. Like if your church has a women's ministry or a men's ministry, that's typically ministering to people within your own church, but it's still a really amazing ministry, and it's still really, really important. All of these are corporate ministries, but they're corporate ministries that are made up of individuals. And so the question is, what is your personal calling? Because like the lady from our church who originally started our chapter of Bags of Love, you know, Bags of Love is a corporate ministry that is nationwide and across many denominations, but it still took Mrs. Rose, who started the ministry in our church, to hear about that and to feel the calling and to accept the calling to say, I want to open a chapter here in our county that I will run. And it was her personal calling to become a part of that greater corporate ministry. And when she passed away, unfortunately, probably, oh goodness, maybe 15 years ago now, somebody else in our church had to pick up that calling and to say, I'm going to take this over so that this ministry is still going strong all these years later. And for like the single mothers ministry in our church, you know, it took somebody to say, hey, there's a need here. I see single mothers in our church that need to be ministered to. The Lord is calling me, and I'm going to step up and I'm going to start this group so that they can be ministered to. And personal callings can look so different for everybody, right? I mean, for some people, their personal calling is to be a missionary. I knew somebody growing up who did a student missionary, and they went somewhere where Christianity was not legal. And it was dangerous enough that they told their family, look, this is where I'm telling you that I'm going. This is where you're going to tell people I'm going, but this is not where I'm going. And I'm not going to tell you where I'm going because nobody can find out that I'm there. Because if the government had found out that they were in their country being a missionary, they would have been killed, you know? And for that person, their personal calling was to go there as a student missionary and to spread the love of God where it was a danger to be. But for other people, personal callings are just hospitality. I mean, there's a lovely lady in my church who hosts lunch after church at her house almost every single weekend, and sometimes it's just for other church members that she invites. Sometimes it's for visitors, you know, when she invites them. But she opens her house every single Sabbath after church for people, and she feeds them, and that is her ministry, and that is what she's great at. And that ministry is just as important as the missionary who went somewhere where Christianity is illegal. We tend to put value on different things. You know, we as humans, we're like, oh, well, this person's out there risking their life to spread the gospel. That's so much more important than this person who's hosting lunch. But it's really not. All of it is important because all of it is something that we are called by God to do. So the question is, what are you called by God to do? What am I called by God to do? Usually it's something scary. Let's be honest. It was scary for Gideon, right? He was like, hold up, you want me to do it? I don't think I should be the one doing it. I thought you were talking about like Israel as a whole. You know, we say, I thought you were talking about church as a whole. Like, why can't my church just do this evangelistic series? Like, why do I have to do something? I'm not sure I want to do something, right? But if we're following God, we're going to do it, even if it's scary. I know for me, one of my personal callings, one of my personal ministries is these videos where I talk about spiritual matters. And I'm not going to lie, it's terrifying. I don't like sitting here and doing it. Like, every time, I dread doing these videos, guys, because I don't feel adequate. I don't feel like like I have the right words or that I'm eloquent enough. I feel like Moses being like, I'm not eloquent enough, you know? But the Lord called me to do it, and I want to follow the Lord, and I want to make an impact, and I want to spread his light to others. And so if he calls me to do this, I'm going to do this. I'm going to sit here and I'm going to do what I feel is kind of like rambling to you guys on these topics, and hope, not even hope, I believe that if God called me to do this, he's going to use these videos to make a difference. I don't know who's watching, but I know that there's going to be somebody who's watching who's impacted, and that's not because of me. That's because of God, because I fully believe that he called me to do this, and if he called me to do it, he called me to do it for a reason. And so I'm doing it despite the fact that it terrifies me. And that is one of my personal callings. But another one of my personal callings is just to be a good aunt and a good sister and a good daughter to my family members when my sister-in-law needs to run errands, for me to be like, hey, it'll be easier for you to run them, you know, on your own. Why don't you leave the girls here for an hour or two so that you can get through this quicker, and I will watch them. That is to me a ministry, and it may not be outwardly as flashy as, say, like doing these videos, but it's important because I'm showing God's love to somebody. I'm showing God's love to my family. I'm showing God's love to my sister by taking the kids so that she can run her errands nicely. I'm showing God's love to the kids every time I'm around them, and I take my job as their aunt very seriously, because I know that I'm a part of that village who is raising them up in the way they should go, and I want to be an influence to lead them closer to Christ and not away from them. You know, the Bible says that if you turn a young one away from Christ, it's better if a millstone is put around your neck and you're drowned in the ocean. And I get that, because I would never want to do anything that turned my nieces or nephews off of Christ, you know? And so everything I do with my family is a ministry. Unfortunately, not one I always excel at, but it is a ministry, just in the same way that these videos are a ministry. And if you ask God what he wants of you, he's going to tell you. And it may be terrifying, like these videos, and he may have more for me that he reveals to me in the future that may be also terrifying. But if I love him, I'm going to do it. And if you love him, you're going to do it, no matter how terrifying it is. And so the question is, what are you being called for? What is he calling you for? Ask him, because he'll tell you. Or maybe he already has told you, and you're like, that sounds terrifying. I don't want to do that. And I feel you. But remember that everything he calls you to do, he's going to give you the strength to do it. And he's calling you to do it for a reason. He has a plan for you doing that, and it's going to be so worth it. When we get to heaven and he shows us why we did these things, it's going to be so worth it. And so sometimes we feel like Gideon, and we want to ask God over and over again, are you sure? Are you really telling me this? What if I just throw out some fleeces over and over and over again? 3 times. Can I throw out the fleece 3 times? Sometimes it feels like that. Sometimes we feel like we have to keep questioning because in all honesty, we don't want to be the one called. But God's going to show us when he wants it to be us, and he'll give us the strength to do it if we're willing to do it. And so in conclusion, I just want to remind you, regardless of what your personal calling is, whether your personal calling is to be a missionary or whether it's to be a good parent or anything in between, it's all important. It's all from God. And regardless of what specific your calling is, there is one thing that we are all called to do, and that comes from Micah 6, verse 8, which says, he has shown you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you? But to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. If we believe in God, he requires of us to walk with him, to do justly, and to love mercy. And everything else, every other calling, He'll show us and He'll help us through. But let's make sure we have that base. Thank you guys for listening. Let me know your thoughts, and I'll see you next time.